Thank you for tuning in to the Rock is George podcast, episode 247, featuring the host of Tim's Vinyl Confessions on YouTube, Tim Durling. Tim is also the author of several books, including Unspooled, An Adventure in 8 Tracks, Down for the Count, the Y&T album review, Let It Be Your Guide, the Kansas album review, The Sound That Haunts You, A Beginner's Companion to Fleetwood Mac, Sing Me Away, the Night Ranger album review, and Red on Black, the listener's guide to Sammy Hagar, which I had the opportunity to read prior to our interview. So our discussion revolves around the Sammy Hagar book, as well as all the content that's available at Tim's Vinyl Confessions. And here's Tim Durling to tell you more about it. Tim, your main vehicle is your YouTube channel, Tim's Vinyl Confessions. It's been in existence for a little over 10 years now. You say that it's a page for exploring the depths of your music collection. Before we get to the content on the page, let's start when you really started getting into collecting music.
Oh, thanks, George. Well, that would have been back in 1986, I think. Yeah, it was 1986. Little album called Slippery When Wet came out. And that was the turning point for me. Like, that was my Beatles on Ed Sullivan moment. It really was at the age of 12. Because up until then, I'd had a few cassettes that I'd gotten as gifts, but I'd never really, I recorded songs off the radio onto blank cassette tapes that I liked. That was really it. But when Bon Jovi got big, they were the first band that I really wanted to own their albums. And that's when I started reading the liner notes and digesting all of the information as far as songwriters and producers and record companies, all of that stuff. It started there. That was ground zero. And that's where my allowance money went. I was 12, so I was kind of getting past spending my money on toys. Wish I'd have bought a few more and kept them in the box, but that's another story. But yeah, and the collecting thing kind of started there too, because once I realized that a band had more than one album, the big album that breaks, well, I got to have those too. So I became like a completist right there. So this disease has been in me for a long time.
Your parents let you buy an album called Slippery When Wet.
I don't really think they paid much attention. Fortunately, in North America and most of the world, we got the censored cover, right?
We did too.
Yeah. So they were, I had wonderful parents. They just didn't want me to go down a wrong path, but I don't think I did.
But I bought Chicago 17 and my mother thought it was crap.
Wow.
But she liked Elvis and anything from the 50s and 60s and stuff like that. So
yeah. Well, yeah. Wow, Chicago. That's pretty. It's like, it's not like you brought home Wasp or anything.
that came later. Her brother was really into Ozzy Osbourne, so maybe she was just worried that I would get into Ozzy Osbourne.
But, it's funny. It's when I think back, it was, it didn't make any sense to them, right? And when they would see a bunch of guys with long hair, it didn't matter. It could be Bon Jovi, it could be Slayer. It just didn't matter, right? But as a parent, I get it when you don't understand it. But I at least trust these kids to make their decisions or whatever, right? But yeah, it's all part of the journey. But yeah, no, that's when my collecting started. Actually, if I'm honest, it started before then. I actually talk about this in my very first book, Unspooled, because if I liked something and I knew that there were more of them, I'll give you an example. Like when I was a kid, and I recently started collecting them again, but I liked the Hardy Boys books.
Yeah.
I wanted to have them all. Why wouldn't I? If I enjoyed one, why wouldn't I enjoy the rest of them? So that's and then it became the fun part of like, there's my mother went to a yard sale and they were selling a bunch of them. Oh, I don't have this one. I don't have this one. It was that, it's fun and it's aggravating.
So when it comes to Bon Jovi, Is there still something out there that you don't have in your collection that you haven't been able to get your hand on?
Yeah, and most people would be like, "What?" It is a copy of their first album on 8-track.
Oh, okay.
I kid you not. There is a Bon Jovi 8-track Columbia House issue,
Uh,
and it is very highly in demand. I've never seen one come up for sale. Was negotiating online with somebody. They wanted $350 for their copy, and then they told me it actually didn't have a back label on it, and then I was really not interested because, to be honest with you, I was thinking about it. I was thinking about it because there wouldn't be that many. That's what my first book is about, is the 8-tracks that Columbia House and the mail order clubs kept putting out in the 80s after they stopped putting out in retail. It's a really weird collecting habit, but it made for a good book. So yeah, that would be my one. That would be my one Bon Jovi grail right there.
so I think that the Columbia houses and the BMG musics of the old days was kind of how people of our generation really got our music, right?
In the days before the internet, it I think they provided a pretty good service to people. I didn't join Columbia House myself up here in Canada until 1993, but I remember at the time when I did, what at that time I was in the process of like replacing my cassettes with CDs, and I got a lot of CDs from Columbia House because they'd have sales, so I'd get a whole bunch of uh, CDs to replace the cassettes, and eventually I'd bought the cassettes back again too, as you can see behind me. But
So,
yeah, no, I think it did, especially if you were in a rural area. And if you were a kid, if you didn't have a license or an older cousin or older brother to go take you to record stores, you were kind of left to whatever was at your local store, or that kind of thing. So I think they did. A lot of people I know, yeah, you get that introductory offer, 11 albums, 12 albums for a penny, whatever format you've got them on, and your music collection was started. Now, that's not how mine started, but I think it was. I think most people that collect music at some point have a Columbia House story.
absolutely. Now I see that you have cassettes and you got albums back there and you got CDs over to my right. Is there a particular format that you tend to favor these days?
Well, see, I like having different formats of albums that I love. I like trying to get them all. CDs, if I have to have on one thing, it's CDs because that's what I actually listen to. I find that the easiest, the most convenient. I've definitely got to have something on CD if possible, unless it's like a record store day only thing that only came out on vinyl, that sort of thing. But yeah, CDs. But I like to try to find the one format I don't have any of. And unless there's a price reduction on the used market, probably never will, is reel to reel.
Well, they're starting to put those back out again.
It's pretty crazy, but they still, if I could go on, eBay or Discogs now, and I could get like a Kiss or an Aerosmith reel to reel, but they're like 200 plus. So I just can't.
So,
I know myself too well, George. If I get one,
yeah.
a collection has begun. So I can't do that. I just can't.
How about mini disc? Remember mini discs? Did they have?
Yeah, I never had any mini discs, and I never had any of those digital compact cassettes that came out for a while, in the early 90s, and they lasted for about 5 years. Yeah, that's the type of thing. If I ever saw one that I liked out in the wild and it wasn't too expensive, I'd probably have to buy it. But like I said, once I would buy, it would never be enough for me to say, "Oh, I'll just get one." I know it's not going to be, that's not how it works.
I thought the Super Audio CDs were going to be something with the 5.1 channel sound, and they are to some audiophiles, but in general, most people aren't buying in on it.
No, and there's another format that I've only got one thing that came out in that format, is MVI, which when Rush put out the album Snakes and Arrows in 2007, I ordered this box set that contained this MVI version of it, which you put it in your computer. You could listen to the album. There was a documentary on it. That's the only thing I've seen like that. So obviously it didn't take off.
No. And it seems like the auto industry is against CDs because any car that you bought in the last 3 years doesn't have a CD player. They're going,
Oh, I hate that. I just just at the end of last year, I sold my last, like the last car that I had was a 2014 Ford Focus, and it had a CD player. Might have been one of the last years that had them. And yeah, you just don't have them, which I think that to me it's still weird that you don't how can you not put a CD player? Like I know I'm old, but I don't think I'm wrong.
we got to go back. We got to go back to the old days where you had the anti-skip portable CD player velcroed to your dash, and you put the CD in there with the little. Well, you got no cassette tape player to throw in.
Right. No, and I had one of those. I had one of those, but I remember my very first car that I bought in 1995 was a 1986 Grand Am, and it took me about 4 or 5 months to find somebody that knew how to install a CD player in it. So, but I remember once I got it installed, I was cruising. I thought that was the coolest thing, right? But looking back, it's like, why weren't you just happy with the cassette deck? That was pretty cool too. But
It's funny. I resisted CDs for the longest time, and then I got them, and the quality was so great. And then now that vinyl's kind of making its resurgence, I'm on the vinyl kick.
I think that it's great. I love the fact that vinyl is making a comeback because in terms of just sheer visuals, there's nothing like that 12 by 12 canvas. But yeah, I never started buying CDs until the end of 1990 because I had hundreds of cassettes and I'm like, I don't want to. I think anybody that's ever dealt with that format change, it's like, what am I going to do with all of, I still want to listen to these albums. But I remember I started buying a few that were in like markdown bins, just more for novelty. Once we had a player in the house, um, I just thought I'd buy a few. And then it got to the point where albums only came out on CD. You couldn't find them on cassette. So kind of had no choice.
And I like how you say you digest the album, who the producers are, and who plays on the album, the musicians involved, what studios it was done in. Because I've been getting into that myself with vinyl, looking and seeing how these repeating players are going over exactly how many guys from Toto are on.
Oh yeah.
Every album.
Oh yeah. It's
Stuff like that.
crazy. It's crazy. Yeah. It's like, well, who played that guitar solo? You guess Steve Lukather, and it's a song from the late 70s or 80s. You're probably right. But yeah, and the funny thing is, George, I thought that everybody did that when they bought a new album. I thought everybody sat there with, listening to their Walkman, reading the liner notes. Not everybody did that, but I did. And I didn't even look at it as educational. I liked the music and I wanted to know more about it. I'm like, what is it? What are the ingredients that make this so good that I can't stop listening? And I used to be annoyed when I would, get into bands that had older albums. You'd buy these older cassettes that had nothing in them for liner notes. So, yeah, no, it just was going in through osmosis. And, my wife and I joke that my short-term memory is terrible. She'll say, did we get, what do we need for groceries? Well, I don't know, but I can tell you where, I could tell you some obscure bit of information about Little Mountain Sound Studio in Vancouver. So
I understand that. So Tim's Vinyl Confessions on YouTube contains quite a variety. You do album reviews, unboxings, top albums of the year list. You do some deep dives into some band catalogs. These videos and the subject matter are based around specifically what's in your collection, right? You're not just taking random stuff and doing this.
yeah, if I'm not into a band or an artist, you're not going to see them on here. And I don't go out of my way to slag stuff I'm not into because if I'm not into it, who cares? It's just our opinions, right? I just don't have time for that. So yeah, I talk about the stuff that I'm passionate about. It's just started as a way to get all of this information I've got in here into get it out there to people. And people seem to be catching on. I've been doing this since 2014. And yeah, when I have a book out, I do a deep dive series on whoever the book is about. So yeah, right now I'm about halfway through, I think, maybe a little more than halfway through Fleetwood Mac deep dive. But yeah, I did a Sammy Hagar one, I did a Kansas one, I did Night Ranger, I did Y&T. So I just think it's a good way to cross promote, I guess. And I like watching these types of shows myself, where it's just on one album. We're going to really dig into this one album.
What got you into doing the whole YouTube thing back in 2014? I mean, for me, it wasn't really something I want to do. I've been interviewing bands and reviewing CDs online since the early internet, and I'm like, podcasting, it sounds just like an interview to me. Why do I have to call it podcasting?
A lot of it was the technology catching up. There were a lot of YouTube channels, and my wife Sarah really was one person that said, you could do this. You could do this. Like, I've seen other people talk about their favorite albums. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to, you just have to, and this is something that you could do. So I thought, well, all right, I'll give it a try. And my early videos are terrible. I mean, I had an old video camera with a USB that you plugged into the computer. So I had an old style video camera from the early 2000s. I was in the complete opposite corner of the room. I don't know what I was thinking. Way in the corner, but I figured out different ways of doing things and better ways of doing things. And the funny thing is that I did it for about 6 years, 5 years anyway, before the advent of Zoom or anything that makes, talking to people from around the world possible. That just completely expanded my reach, as it did for everyone. But I enjoy doing it. I mean, when it stops being fun, I stop doing it, but it hasn't stopped being fun for me.
Did you do something with a similar medium before you started your YouTube page? Like, did you work in online magazines or print magazines or something like that?
Not really. The closest thing would have been, like I still work in radio, but when I was on an on-air capacity, we had to write blogs for the station websites. Most of the time that had nothing to do with the music that I personally was into, but I was pretty good at it, as far as I could, I can talk the talk. Because you have to. You can't. It's not about your taste if you're in commercial radio. You're providing information to people. So I guess that would be one place. And then I used to be, before Facebook came along, there were a lot of fan forums. I always contributed to those and enjoyed discussing with people and things like that. But the information has just been up here waiting. It had been waiting for a way to get out. Honestly, when I first started Tim's Vinyl Confessions, it was a way for me to talk about my vinyl collection, because it was in my closet. It was just, I didn't really have a place to store it at the time. And so that's where it started. And then it expanded into other formats. And then I got other people that regularly co-host with me. And it just kind of, next thing you know, you're a year into it, you're 2 years into it, you've got X amount of episodes, you start doing more episodes. I used to do one episode every once in a while. I wasn't on a regular schedule. And then I realized, look, if I'm going to build an audience, I've got to be consistent with this. So then it was a steady one episode a week, and then it was two, and now it's three new episodes every weekend. So, and that's kind of how I keep going.
Do you find it frustrating dealing with music, either doing an album review or a deep dive or top 10 list? Is it frustrating to you? Because it's frustrating to me that you can't really use any music to make this presentation.
I just don't even bother. I just don't even bother, because the few times that I've had to deal with it, it would be frustrating. I'd be frustrated all the time. And like I said, it would stop being fun. So I just don't. I want people to go, if I'm talking about an album, I think people should go out and buy it and hear it for themselves. Or if I'm talking about a classic album, I trust that a lot of people watching are already familiar with it. But some of the copyright, I've never had any out and out strikes, but when you get the notice that, you've got sharing, right? Copyright sharing. One of the dumbest ones, George, I got is I did a review I guess it's almost been 4 years now. This CD DVD combo came out from Neil Sean from Journey because he did this very, very brief tour where it was sort of like a side journey. So he had Greg Raleigh
Journey
and he
Through
had
Time.
Journey Through Time. And I love that early stuff. I love the first three albums. I mean, I like the band anyway, but and all I did to feature the music is I was literally in my living room watching the DVD on TV and I was filming with my phone. So you can imagine the sound quality, how good it was. Just clips, just small clips of songs. And I got dinged with, I couldn't have, there was no monetization, got demonetized. And I'm like, there's nothing usable here.
Right.
So why? I don't get it. I don't get it.
I even get permission from the PR and the record labels to use up to 30 seconds of music, and I don't even try it because YouTube doesn't know that I have this permission.
No, it's insane. It's insane. I've heard more people, if Rick Beato has trouble, I'm not even going to try. You know what I mean?
Fair enough. Your most popular videos, and then I mean, you said that your earlier videos were on a kind of crappier camera and stuff like that, but your older videos are pretty popular. You got the first 20 minutes of a Def Leppard concert, a concert report from Foreigner, Whitesnake, and Jason Bonham, a review of, I believe, the last Kansas studio album, a critique on Rolling Stone's greatest hair bands, and an interview with Lou Gramm. Are you still doing the concert reports?
Well, I don't go to that many concerts anymore. I just don't. And I've never been in an area which has been inundated with classic rock artists coming through. The last show that I went to, and I did a review episode, was Adrian Vandenberg, about a year ago now. So yeah, I do when the opportunity presents itself. It's funny that you just never know what's going to take off. And all those shows that you mentioned are pretty old ones for me. But in that Lou Gramm interview, actually, that's one from my radio days. That was not one from after the channel started. I just thought I'd put it up if people wanted to listen to it. That was a fun afternoon when I got to do that, because that was actually, that was me getting paid for interviewing one of my favorite singers. And that's funny too, because I mean, that Def Leppard, it was the Def Leppard and Tesla show from 2019. I don't know if I got any copyright things for that. So it just depends. You just never know, right?
Way on live shows.
Yeah. Although I did try to post clips from a Queen tribute band and got dinged. You just don't know with the algorithms and the bots and
all that stuff.
Know. Yeah.
I feel like at this point, you should be interviewing more people, talking to them about these classic albums that you have. I definitely think it's within your reach.
I have, you mean talking to the musicians themselves?
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of it's reach. A lot of it is not knowing how to get to people. But I have been quite fortunate. I've been able to talk to, a few favorite. This is one of my cats. It's on my lap now. I have been fortunate enough to talk to, members of some of my favorite bands. It's, I don't know. I'm kind of funny in that way, because I have no problem getting in front of, a camera and a microphone and jawing away about something, but I'm kind of shy about reaching out to somebody cold. And it's like, who's this guy? But if somebody can speak, can vouch for me, it's not like I haven't tried. Let's put it that way. It's just when an opportunity presents itself, I'll go for it. But I don't know if I'm answering your question. It has to feel right to me. It's like, yeah, this is a good idea if I do this or not,
Some of my best interviews have been reaching out cold.
Yeah.
Yeah. You'd be surprised what you can accomplish. And what I would say is you start off with, like, pick that one or two studio musicians that you like from your albums. Pick that guy, because that guy's going to love to talk.
Yeah. You're not going to get, your top choice right away, but you might get, And sometimes when you get to interview people that haven't been interviewed 1,000 times, it's a more interesting interview because they haven't got canned answers ready to go. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see what the future brings.
Now, in addition to your YouTube page, you have several self-published books. Your most current one is The Sound That Haunts You, a beginner's companion to Fleetwood Mac, that came out in October of 2025. I think this is a great idea for a book based on reading your Sammy Hagar book and how it was structured, because Fleetwood Mac, for me, for a lot of people, they don't really listen to the pre-Stevie Nicks and Lindsey and stuff, so they don't know a lot about it. And sometimes when you dip your toe into it, you're like, this isn't Fleetwood Mac.
It's pretty crazy. So the Fleetwood Mac one is way off the beaten path for me of the types of groups that I do these books about. Most of the time, it's about bands that either there haven't been many books written about them, or there haven't been any books written about them. I still think that the only book about Y&T is mine, which I think every classic band should be commemorated. I don't think there's ever been another book on just Sammy Hagar's solo career. I don't think people realize how extensive it is. So, but the Fleetwood Mac one was based on a comment that my mother-in-law made once I started doing books. She said, and she loves Fleetwood Mac. She said, "When are you going to write me a Fleetwood Mac book?" And I don't think she wasn't serious about it, but I got thinking about it. Well, how would I do that? How would I write a book about a band that there's been a zillion books written about? There's been books that have just been written about one album of theirs. So how would I do that? And that's why I call this a beginner's companion, because it is an intimidating catalog if you want to go a little bit further. Now, if you grew up in the late 60s, especially in the UK and Europe, that Peter Green blues era Fleetwood Mac, that's the real Fleetwood Mac. The rest of it is just pop garbage, right? And there's so many albums, there's so many compilations. How do you know where to start? That's why I did that book. That's why I wanted it's the type of book I wish that I had when I was trying to discover, okay, where to go next, what to get next, where's the best introduction, where's the best entry point. And that has kind of been the format for all of my books. The difference with the Fleetwood Mac and the Sammy Hagar one is that it's all me. The other books have been panel discussion books where I've opened it up to ask a variety of people the same question and then put the answers together as if we're all sitting around having a big conversation. With the Sammy Hagar one, that was different because I'm a huge fan and I had the hardest time finding all of his solo albums because they were pretty obscure, the early days. And I had so much that I wanted to say about them. But with the Fleetwood Mac one, it was basically what does somebody need to know about each of these albums? They need to know what songs are on each one, and hopefully give them an idea of what each one is like sonically.
This is the Sammy Hagar book, Red on Black. I read this over the last couple of weeks. I like the way that you set it up. I like the way you start with his early stuff. Well, I guess there's different Sammy eras. There's the Capitol era, the Geffen era, getting into Van Halen, and then going back to a solo artist. And I think after Van Halen, I think you could split the I'm a solo artist again into eras as well. You discovered Sammy Hagar late, kind of like I did. I knew of Sammy Hagar, but I didn't really get into him until Van Halen's Balance. And I think that was about the time that you got into him as well, right?
Well, I got into him 5150 when, I heard Why Can't This Be Love on the radio. See, 84 going into 85, I would have been 10 going on 11. That's when I really started listening to the radio for me, not just whatever my parents listened to, not whatever was on the AM radio in the kitchen that was just on all the time. It's when I found a top 40 station that I liked, and I really started paying attention to, who does which song. Videos were starting to become more common, although we didn't have, in Canada, we didn't have MTV. We had Much Music. was sort of the equivalent. It went on the air in 84, but we didn't get it where I lived until early 86. But and I knew who Van Halen was, obviously, but I knew Van Halen via the 1984 singles. That's about it. I think other than, Jump and Panama and Hot for Teacher, I'll Wait. I think the only other thing I'd heard from Van Halen was You Really Got Me. And I couldn't have told you. I didn't know how many albums they had. I didn't know. You're just learning things, right? And when Dave came out with California Girls, Just a Gigolo, I was along for the ride there. I knew that they had a new singer. Uh, didn't know anything about him. But when I heard Why Can't This Be Love, I was hooked. I was like, I didn't know who it was at first because it wasn't the DJ did not intro it. I just heard the song come on. I'm like, what is this? I could listen to this guy sing anything. This is incredible. This is so catchy. And then they back sold it. Hey, that's a brand new one from Van Halen. And in my mind, it went, oh, that's Van Halen. And look, there's so much hate that goes towards Sammy. And I don't understand why. It's not liking the music. They hate him. And they still do. Like they have the same worn out line for 40 years, and I don't understand it. Life is too short, people. Who hurt you? Seriously. But that's when I got on board. That's my Van Halen. Did I go back and buy the old albums? Of course I did. Of course I did. Did I buy all of Dave's solo? That wasn't much. Of course I did. But in doing that, I started to hear, oh, okay. I guess I've heard that I Can't Drive 55. I guess I knew that song or heard it a couple of times. And so then I was Sammy Hagar was on my radar, not just as a member of Van Halen, but as a solo artist, because then he came out with what Winter Takes It All from Over the Top, and then he did his Contractual Obligation album in '87. So by that time I was buying albums. So that's when so yeah, I'm not someone that was in on the ground floor for sure. I found out who Sammy Hagar was when most of the world did. That was his highest profile, right? Is Van Halen. So, but I went back. I always go back.
Well, I'll tell you what your book did do for me. I always thought that the Capitol years of Sammy Hagar were just utter garbage. Hated it. Did not like it at all. Didn't sound very good quality. Maybe a song or two was okay, but hearing him do older songs live was much better, at least for me. But when I got to the first live compilation that you covered, I want to say maybe it was Red Hot.
Yeah.
And, I put that one on and I'm like, you know what? Tim's right. He's like, the live material does kind of bring alive those years.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say to anybody, Sammy's one of the few artists, that era. I wouldn't normally start someone off with a live album, but in his case, I would. I'm like, listen to All Night Long or listen to the Live 1980, because that's where that Red Hot comes from, all those songs that are on there. Yeah, I have a chapter dedicated to that. I call it Truck Stop Tapes. And that was a lot of fun putting that together. I'd been wanting to talk about that for a long time, that phenomenon of finding these cheap looking cassettes and like, what is this real? Like, it's got a label on it. It looks cheap. It's got the song titles written on the cover. Like, what is this? And that was my first Sammy Hagar, was that Red Hot cassette, which I only bought because it's the only one that I had enough money to buy. But boy, it did the job, because I'd never heard any of those songs before. That introduced me. And then very soon after that, I realized that he was in this band called Montrose. And then I went back and found that first album, and it's one of my favorite albums of all time. But yeah, the Capitol material, if you're listening to the studio albums, it's very spotty. It's all over the place stylistically. They've got him doing Van Morrison covers and Donovan covers, and it's very strange. It's very eclectic. But of course, I wanted to find it, and it was really hard to find. But yeah, when you listen to those live albums, he picks the best of the best. He picks the most rocking stuff of that early material, like Red and Turn Up the Music, and it sounds better. It's got more energy to it. That's not unique. A lot of those 70s productions are very polite, very tame. And when you hear the live stuff, it's faster. The guitars are more distorted. There's the 70s is an era that there's a reason why so many bands broke with live albums in the 70s, because they sounded better than this. They had more life to them than the studio versions, that, Kiss and Cheap Trick and, you name it. Unfortunately, Sammy never reached that level as a solo artist. I mean, when he signed to Geffen, yes, he started having some gold and platinum albums. He was never a huge star, but he was just like this dependable rock guy. And I don't think his songwriting changed all that much, because once he got to Street Machine and Danger Zone, which is the last two albums he did for Capitol, they were pretty hard rock down, straight down the middle. They weren't as eclectic. I just think that the difference with Geffen is that he actually had an A&R person saying, I don't want you to just record the first 10 songs you write. Go in there and write 20 songs and give me the 10 best and put those on the record. That sort of thing. And lo and behold, with a little bit of promotion, he starts selling records and showing up, as a minor, success story. Certainly, it put him in the position where he was, an entity, or a recognizable name when Van Halen needed a lead singer. Although, I mean, if you read the stories, I mean, that name was thrown around a lot earlier than when he actually did join Van Halen. And that Montrose album was so influential that Van Halen, with David Lee Roth, actually did songs from it in the clubs. So it's kind of weird how their orbits were sort of like destined to come together.
True. Now, you mentioned that Sammy kind of, from a songwriting standpoint, hits similar themes throughout his solo career, and even with Van Halen, where he talks a lot about girls and cars and aliens from outer space and stuff like that. But there's one that I noticed. I didn't see your book mention it, but maybe you picked up on it too. He has this sort of lyrical writing style and he's repeated it a few times in his life, where he likes to do, because of this is that. So he does it in Right Now. He does it in Both Sides Now, where you got to learn how to listen before you learn to talk. You got to learn to crawl before you learn to walk. He does something similar in Right Now. The more things you get, the more you want. He does lines like that. Repeat, and he does it in cosmic universal fashion too. I can't think of the words off my head, but he does that. You got to do this, or this needs to happen for this to happen.
Wow. I know exactly what you mean. I don't think it consciously occurred to me.
I don't think it consciously occurs to him.
No, I think that's true of a lot of songwriters. You just write the way you write. And I think it's not until you get a body of work that people can look back and go, there's a theme here. The space thing is interesting. He's an interesting guy. I mean, there's, a lot of people think, oh yeah, you write songs about driving fast. And that's true, but that's not all he writes about. And obviously, his lyrics got better over the years.
Yes.
I mean, I know, as big a fan as I am, I take him to task for stuff like Cruising and Booze, and I'm like, how irresponsible is that to write a song about drinking and driving? Even though obviously it wasn't meant to be taken seriously, but still. But by the time you get to something like Mine All Mine from OU 812, he's getting very introspective, and that would continue, over the years, although he'd still, he's an entertainer. One of his favorite things, are we having any fun yet? And he always says, if people don't cheer it loud enough, well, I must not be doing it right. I got to work harder. He's just, and that's the thing, another reason why I don't get all the hatred for him, because he just wants to make music and entertain people. I don't know. Why is that such a big deal? If he didn't get the job in Van Halen, somebody would have.
I think his post Van Halen material is a mixed bag, like you think, but I mean, you give it a little more respect than I would. I think that the albums after Van Halen, Marching to Mars was great, and 1013 was good, and then it's kind of waffling off at that point, where I think making an album was just a vehicle for you to go see the tour, because the tour was where it was at.
Well, it started to, and I'm very vocal about this in the book, I'm just not the biggest fan of the whole hard rock Jimmy Buffett thing and the flip-flops and sitting on the beach with an acoustic guitar. I'm not into that at all. I want to hear Sammy rock, I think that of all of the albums post Van Halen, I've called Marching to Mars my second favorite of all his solo albums. And I've talked to people that really don't like that album. I just hear so much passion in it. He was he was hurting. He
Yeah.
never wanted to not be in Van Halen. That he was blindsided by that. And it's funny because when you look back and throughout their career, you could see very, very early on the seeds for that discontent with the brothers was sowing, as early as OU812. Just different things, but things didn't get talked about, I guess. I think it's like a real lack of communication. And then, of course, when their manager, Ed Leffler, who had been Sammy's manager, died, that really threw things, things were never quite the same after that. But yeah, 1013 is an album that it was one of those ones that came out. I remember buying that around the time that I started, like my kids were starting to, I was starting to raise a family, and I bought the albums, but I didn't give them their due. I didn't, but then when I went back and listened to that in preparation for the book, because every time I do a book, I just do heavy listening to all of this stuff. I just want to make sure it's fresh in my mind and I know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about a particular song. I'm not getting it mixed up with another one. I forgot how good 1013 was, like really good, really solid. And that's surprising to me because the next one he put out after that, Not for Sale, I don't really like at all. I don't think it's unfinished. It sounds rushed to me and it sounds unfinished. It sounds like some of the songs have potential, but knowing that it was rushed to get out on tour, it sounds like it. It's not finished. And that Living It Up is my absolute least favorite of all of them. But I still had to have it. Do you understand? You know what I mean? Like I still had to have it. And I really, really liked Chickenfoot. I thought that was its own thing. Even though you had Sammy and Mike, you had half of that Van Halen lineup. It doesn't sound anything like Van Halen. And it doesn't sound like one of Sammy's solo albums either. Whether it was Joe writing the riffs, whether it was Chad Smith on drums, it was its own thing. I was so happy when I found out that first album went gold. I thought that's fantastic because that never happens anymore with these older bands. Even though they were a new band, they weren't, right? So I was really disappointed when that didn't continue because nothing he's done since Marching to Mars is as good as that first Chickenfoot album, I don't think. I think he works best in context of a group where he's not the only guy calling all the shots. Mike Anthony is a great musician, fantastic bass player. He takes a lot of crap, which is not deserved. Great background singer. He's not a leader. He's not a songwriter. So when Sammy doesn't have a stronger personality to bounce ideas off of, that's when you get Living It Up. That's when you get Not for Sale. That's when you get Sammy Hagar and Friends. All of these albums where there are moments that you kind of like. Now, having said all of that, the last two albums he's done, the Circle album, Space Between and Crazy Times, I think are good, not great, but they're better than what had come before for his solo career. So I don't know. I mean, he's one of very few people from his generation. The guy's 78 years old and he's still got his pipes for the most part. He can still perform at a really high level, especially in the studio.
Right.
So I always say with these older bands, we've only got give us more music, not less. I want to hear where these guys are at now in their lives. Right. So
Right.
yeah, I hope this lineup that did the live stuff that, the best of all worlds, whatever you want to call it. I hope this lineup does an album, a studio album, new songs.
The live recording sounds fantastic.
Great. I wished I could have seen one of the shows. It was nothing close to me. But the only time I've ever seen Sammy is I saw the Balance Tour in '95 in Maine at Old Orchard Beats. That's the one time I saw Van Halen. It's the one time I saw Sammy.
Saw Sammy on the Balance tour. I saw them on the reunion tour with Van Halen. I saw the Sam and Dave show, which Sammy just absolutely destroyed Dave on stage.
That
Sammy a few years back.
The Sam and Dave thing is so weird to me. I remember when that happened. Again, this was, I was really, really, not paying attention to music like I would because my kids were babies, right? You can't. You have to do the adult thing. Um, I still think it's really weird. It's almost like I've said this to people before too. If somebody came out and said, by the way, because I didn't get to any of those, obviously, I didn't get to any of those shows. There was no live document to commemorate it. So hopefully you can see where I'm going with this. But if somebody came out and said, by the way, that never actually happened, April Fools, I'd have believed it. Because I'm like, that makes no sense.
I
That
would.
makes no sense. Like it's like how, and I'm amazed that it lasted as long as it did with those two like diametrically opposed personalities. I think it was a great thing for fans because the band was not doing anything. They were idle for so many years. That's one of the things about Van Halen that's so disappointing is that there were so many years in between albums. It's like I just wish we'd had more because of the Van Halen, estate and whether Alex is in charge of it or not, we may never hear anything unfinished. There may never be, we're finally getting reissues of the Hagar era albums. For many, many years, they were like unique in that they were the only like multi-platinum albums that had never seen deluxe issues, and the only versions of them were the old ones that came out, and that was it. Which is just and then how many times have they reissued the first six,
Right.
right? Um, and even now, if you didn't get a different kind of truth when it first came out, you can't just go out and get that either. So talk about a mismanaged catalog. Like it's just a shame because people love Van Halen,
Hmm.
no matter who was in the band. I would like to hear that rumored unfinished second album with Gary Sharon. I'd like to hear it, give it a shot, see what happens. I'd like to hear those sessions that supposedly they did with Dave way back in 2000 that never amounted to anything. There were so many false starts with this band, and they just weren't doing anything. And the most activity there was in that period was, lo and behold, Sammy comes back. It didn't last. It fell apart, but at least we got 3 new songs out of it.
True. Although the reissues on the Sammy era albums haven't been great. It's all stuff we've had
It's
before.
all stuff we've had, but at least we're getting something.
Right.
At least we got the Live in Dallas. At least we're getting an audio version of Live Without a Net in some form or another because we weren't getting anything and it didn't look like we were going to get anything. No, the reissues don't make any sense and there's stuff sitting there right in front of them that they could put out, right? Why wouldn't you put Get Up out? It was part of this. I don't, there's just things that don't make sense. But for years we got nothing, and it didn't look like we were going to get anything. So, what did we get? We got that awful Tokyo Dome concert,
Yeah.
which looks good if you're just looking at the track list.
Right.
But then you go and listen to it.
Uh, to clarify on the Sammy Hagar book, your focus here is strictly on his solo catalog. You don't cover Montrose as extensively, Chickenfoot, or his Van Halen years. You touch upon it. You don't go as deep as you do on Sammy's solo stuff.
Right, right. There's a chapter on Montrose, there's a chapter on Van Halen, and there's a chapter on Chickenfoot. Other than that, each chapter is one of Sammy's studio albums, of which I'm sure there are way more than most people think they are. Probably most people could, they could name you maybe the Geffen albums from the 80s, and that's it.
Yeah.
But he's been, unlike a lot of people from his era, he's been very prolific, post Van Halen. He's been on all these different labels. That's why it gets confusing. You don't see the stuff in stores. And I wanted to have one book where somebody could pick up and like, this is what he did. And in the chapters where it's most appropriate time-wise, if there's a Stray song here that he put out by itself, I talk about it in context of the chapter because there are things like I remember around 2008, there was this song called Open that got a little bit of radio play. And I thought, okay, well, this must be going to be on his next album. And then Cosmic Universal Fashion comes out and it's not. Like, well, I hate that. Like, why? Why would you go through the trouble of recording something and not commit it to an album?
Right.
So I did try to catch all of those Stray songs, like all of his soundtrack songs. And then one of my favorite parts of the book is talking about, if he was to cover a song, where the original came from. Conversely, if somebody covered one of his songs, who did. That was a lot of fun, and that was educational for me. So I do that in the right spot too. If he's got a soundtrack song, I do that in the closest year. He's still got songs that need reissued. Like I wish that they, Rock Candy Records or somebody like that would reissue Standing Hampton and give us CD versions of Satisfied and Don't Get Hooked, which were B-sides from that era. Those are great songs, especially Satisfied. It's never been on CD. What's up with that? You know? So this, it's when you scratch your head and like I understand in the case of when you put these comps out, if you're dealing with soundtrack songs and you're not just dealing with a record label, you're dealing with a movie studio. And sometimes they just want too much to license a song. But these were just songs he recorded during the Standing Hampton sessions. The tapes are there somewhere. Put them out. Like there is an audience for that type of stuff.
Sure.
I don't think Sammy's been there's never been one definitive compilation of Sammy's stuff that when he put out, well, in 2004 when oddly enough when Van Halen reunited, Universal put out the Essential Red collection. That was pretty good. Because now you've got Fast Times at Ridgemont High, The Girl Gets Around, Winner Takes It All. You've got all those songs in one place. Okay. That would have been a great place to stick those, put a 2-disc version of that out and put those B-sides on there. It's like, there's reasons why things come out and reasons why they don't, but I'd like to know, like surely somebody out there must know these songs exist. Hopefully that's working at a record label. So, it's just those
It would have
odd.
It would have to be a record label because I feel like Sammy's put all that in the past and just like,
oh yeah, like yeah.
Go.
Oh man, that was a long time. You know what I mean? But there are diehard fans that want to hear that stuff. I mean, I thought it was great when Rhino put out the deluxe versions of the first 2 Montrose albums. There's a couple of songs on there that weren't on any of the albums. I want to hear it.
Right.
I want to hear like Sammy I've never heard from 1973, that sort of thing. Right.
Right. Well, as we reach the top of the hour, I wanted to mention your other books. We mentioned The Sound That Haunts You, A Beginner's Companion to Fleetwood Mac. You also have Sing Me Away, the Night Ranger album review. Let It Be Your Guide, the Kansas album review. Down for the Count, the Y&T album review, which may be the only Y&T book out there. And Unspooled, an adventure in 8 tracks, which you mentioned is about kind of that transitional period where 8 tracks were in stores and went to mail order catalog. Are you working on another book?
I've got 2 right now that are in various states of completeness. Probably won't see another one until I'm going to say the summer, maybe a little sooner. But yeah, I don't see any reason to stop. The odd thing is that somebody mentioned this to me about my books because I did Y&T and I did Sammy Hagar and I did Night Ranger, and they said, "Are you going to do, all Bay Area?" I'm like, I didn't plan it that way, but you're right. Maybe I'll do a Tesla book. I don't know, but yeah, no, I like shedding light on I think artists and groups that just need that extra little bit of hey, yeah, I know this band is great, that band is great, but if you like those bands, you might like, you know what I mean? And as far as Sammy goes, I think there's a lot more people that know who he is than really know his catalog inside out.
Well, you mentioned that somebody pointed out that, your books are related to the Bay Area musicians. I'm kind of surprised you're not covering a Canadian band. It seems like hitting the nail on the head there.
Well, watch this space. It is funny. The Unspooled book started. That was a Kickstarter campaign, and I had no thoughts of being an author. I really didn't. It just kind of fell in my lap. I had this idea and went with it, and it did really well as a Kickstarter campaign, like for an independent book. Then once I discovered that it was possible to put books out via Amazon, and all of a sudden that means like I don't need to worry about shipping, I don't need to worry about damages, I don't need to worry about packaging. That was great. So I brought Unspooled over, in a second edition. And then all my other books have been through Amazon. So that's where all my books are available. 5 years ago, I had no books. Now I've got 6. This was totally something that I wasn't planning on doing, but it's been great. And it's just been a matter of, so once I always thought once Unspooled came out, I'm like, that's cool. I wrote a book and that was going to be it. But once I realized that it was a little bit easier to put them out because it was a labor of love, but it was a labor. There was no question about it. If I was going to do a group or a book on one band, it was no question it was going to be Y&T because they're one of my favorite bands ever. And I've never understood why they weren't huge. They've always been one of my favorite bands, and they're always a band that people would trip on when I'd list the names of bands that I like. They'd be like, wait, what? Who? What? What is that? What does that mean? And it's like, this is criminal. They should be as well known as Aerosmith or Van Halen. But, and believe it or not, that's my best-selling book by a pretty wide margin. So yeah, why no Canadian bands? I don't know. There will be. There definitely will be because there's there's a lot of great bands that came from this country, but it's all in good time. There needs to be one. Rick Emmett put out a great book, but it's not just about Triumph. So yeah, there needs to be. And it's always one of those things where if somebody else wrote a book like the books that I wrote, I would have just bought those books. But I didn't see anything out there in the market quite like the books that I've put out. So I said, well, I think there's a lack of something in the market. So let's do that. And the album review format just seems to work for me. I'm not interested in biographical stuff. I'm not interested in digging up dirt. Yeah. I just want to talk about the music. It's an extension of the YouTube channel in a lot of ways.
And I think part of the answer to why Y&T wasn't bigger was because they did sound like Sammy Hagar and Van Halen.
Well, yes and no. I don't know. I could talk all day about the greatness of that band and how there were so many points in their career where they could and should have broken through. But Dave Meniketti does have sort of a Sammy Hagar type of voice. I can tell them apart, but hey, there could be there are a lot worse voices you could sound like. But as a guitar player I think maybe the name caused a little bit of confusion too. Yeah. But I'll tell you, like I said, it's my best-selling book because they have a diehard audience all over the world. We may not be big, but we're there. And, I think that, that's a band that the biggest of bands, if the bands themselves aren't working on curating their legacy or the label isn't curating the legacy, there are bands that will be forgotten if people don't stick their hand up and go, hey, I think these guys are pretty great in some way or another. So it's just my little way, in my small way, and the avenue I have of doing it. It's keeping the music alive because as I get older and older, I understand current popular music less and less, and I cherish the old stuff. And I'm still interested in what these guys are doing now. The ones that are still putting out new music. And that's the other thing, like with the books that I've done, these are groups that still record and put out new albums for the most part, because a lot of bands just stop. They just tour and tour and tour and tour and tour. And here's a box set and here's a reissue and here's another best of, here's another live album. I'm talking with bands that have put out new recordings, newly written songs. And and most of the time they're on smaller labels and don't get their due. So, that's why the Kansas book and the Night Ranger book exists, and the Sammy one. I mean, so many albums have come out, and none of them have certified except for that Chickenfoot album. So I just think it's important to say, hey, by the way, he did an album in this year, and then that year, and then that year. I may not like all of them, but here they are. Here's the songs on them.
Well, Tim, those are all the questions I have for you today. Tim's Vinyl Confessions can be found on YouTube, and your books can be found at Amazon. I want to thank you for taking the time to tell me more about your YouTube page and your books. I actually had a great time.
Thank you very much, George. I appreciate it.
Once again, I want to thank Tim Durling of Tim's Vinyl Confessions for coming on the Rock is George podcast. Be sure to check out Tim's Vinyl Confessions on YouTube. You can also pick up one of Tim's books at Amazon.com and learn more about them on his YouTube page. You've been great. I've been George Dionne. Discover your next favorite artist on the Rock is George podcast.